Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines. We're very fortunate to have on the show Judge Toni Higginbotham. She is a First Circuit Court of Appeal judge. She was first for 15 years a judge in family court and didn't get her law license until she was age 40. She's the first female judge elected to the First Circuit from East Baton Rouge Parish. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Judge Toni Higginbotham. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm very pleased to have on the show today Judge Toni Higginbotham. She's a judge with the First Circuit Court of Appeal. Judge, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you back. We were just talking about how long it's been. It's crazy. For the folks, just quickly tell them a little personal history, because it's interesting to kind of learn where folks have been and how they got to where they are.
Well, I have 4 children, and I've been married to my husband for 42 years.
Fantastic.
And believe it or not, I have 3 out of 4 lawyers. I didn't do something right. I don't know.
Now, I don't know if that's fantastic.
That's what I mean. But I graduated from LSU. I'm from North Louisiana, Lake Providence, and I came to LSU, and I became a teacher. And I taught in East Ascension and Central Private.
Lee High School, too.
And Lee High School.
That's my alma mater.
And then I began having children, and so I stayed home for about 11, 12 years. And then I decided that I was going to go to law school, so I went to law school at 40.
Fantastic. I love that story.
Been doing
and
things around the law.
Summa cum laude?
I did.
High honor. Tell the folks, because my recall is Judge Leo Higginbotham is your husband, and he served what? 12
years, I think, on the district bench. He did civil and criminal. And I never really planned on being a judge. I was doing other things. I've always been real active with kids in the community and in the community itself.
In fact, I was reading a coach of about every sport there is to play.
I did. But when you have 4 children, somebody's got to step up to the plate, so I usually got called on. Not that I was an expert, but I showed up, and I cared about it.
Fantastic.
And so I decided I represented several kinds of clients as a lawyer.
I guess what we call is a typical general civil practice, but also kind of handled some criminal stuff.
I did all of it, but not all the time.
Right.
And the family court judgeship came up in 1996, and I decided to run. And
Tell the folks the story. It's a great story. I mean, it wasn't really something you were focused on doing, as I understand it.
No, I just happen to think that judges, their temperament is very, very important. Your knowledge is important, but most people that are qualified to run for judge have the requisite knowledge, but it's other things that make people good judges, I think.
I agree.
And so I just saw this judgeship open up when Judge Toni Graffia retired, and I kept thinking, they need somebody in there that has good temperament to deal with these very hard and difficult issues in family court. And so I went down the last day of qualifying and qualified myself with no knowledge of how to do this or what was going to be required, but committed to it. And I was successful, and that's where I served until I was elected last October to the
So there for a family court for 15 years, right? And it's interesting too, because you really hadn't focused on it, but you held a lot of positions after you graduated from law school. You were appointed by President Ronald Reagan to the Selective Service Board, appointed by Governor Dave Treen as an assistant secretary for
Department of Urban and Community Affairs, and then I ended up being counsel to the Police Jury Association of Louisiana. And then I ended up being vice president of the Louisiana Housing Finance Agency.
So held a lot of leadership positions.
Well, I guess you could call it that. I just sort of volunteered, and whatever I could do, I did.
It's interesting that road led you to running for judge, and then family court was not something, like you indicated, that you'd really done a lot of, because it's a very labor intensive, and also you better know what you're doing.
Well, it's very concentrated. area of the law. But, you know, my whole life I have done the things that I have done because I think our communities and our families are so important.
They are. I agree 100%.
And so that was just another way that I thought I could serve and bring to the table my experiences as teaching, as raising a family, as working with kids in our community, and with my legal background and my temperament. I thought I could give something back, and I think I did. I hope I did.
Well, Judge, and we've talked about this before, but you know, when you're dealing with family court issues, you're dealing with, frankly, in my opinion, the most important issues that human beings deal with, and that is the relationship between a husband and a wife, relationship between the parents and their children, and sometimes grandparents and the grandchildren. You're dealing with custody of the children, support. It's just real serious stuff.
Well, it's where the rubber hits the road. It's where, you know, people, the decisions are so important because they hopefully figure out a way that they're going to be fed and that they're going to be nurtured and taken care of when somebody's going through a very emotional split. And so most of our people in our community, I think if you ask them where their association or their experience with the courts are going to say family court. So it's very important that our judges be committed to doing a very good job and representing the judiciary in a good way.
And making wise, fair decisions. I mean, because you're dealing with, like we said, the preeminent relationships and the encounter of human beings. The other big issue that you're dealing with when the family unit is dissolving is how the property is going to be split up and how the debt's going to be paid off. It's serious stuff.
And how they're going from one house to two and still maintaining a family in a different form. That's the goal.
And explain to folks what, because you were there for 15 years, and I think of it as the front lines. Being a trial court judge, you're on the front lines. You're seeing live human beings. Explain to the folks what a typical family case was like.
Well, I mean, they take different forms, but basically the main difference in a family case and a civil case like you mainly do is that we don't have beginnings and ends of cases in a fashion that's a year or 2 years or something like that. We have jurisdiction over children until they turn 18. So
remarkable. I hadn't even really thought about that, Judge.
Depending on when they first appeared in our court, we have a relationship with those people in deciding issues that they ask us to decide, maybe up to 18 years or longer if the children are staggered.
Remarkable.
And so, you know, you have to be the kind of person that receives the evidence, and I think what you were alluding to was like the trial bench. This is where people come and they present their facts, their stories, their testimony, and the trial judge sits there and decides what to give great weight to and what decisions should be made based on the law and the facts that are ascertained from the trial. So you are on the bench daily, having people present evidence and seeing these people firsthand, so you can decide whether you think they have credibility or don't have credibility, or, you know, if this is the fact or that's the fact, and then you use the law and make a decision. And
the bottom line is oftentimes it can't be more acrimonious. I mean, if one wants custody and the other one does too, somebody's not going to get what they want, or how the property is going to be split up, or child support. And so oftentimes when you make a decision in favor of one, it's to the detriment, so to speak, to the other. We sort of have a saying in family court that if everybody leaves not happy, we probably have done a good job. It's a good settlement. So, in other words, you know, we have to educate them. That was part of my job, is to say, this is what the law can do for you. I can't repair something that's happened before, make you feel better about it, but this is why we're here and this is what I can do. So let's limit it to those facts. All right, well, let's continue this on the next segment. Let's move into how you decided to run for the First Circuit Court of Appeal. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines. Judge Higginbotham will be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show today Judge Toni Higginbotham. She is a judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeal. Judge, again, thanks so much for coming back.
Thanks for inviting me.
Let's shift gears a little bit, because you've talked about what it was like to try a case as the judge, making huge decisions at the trial level, and then you decided to run for the Court of Appeal. What inspired that?
Well, I think anytime you're involved in a profession, you always think that if you have an opportunity and if the timing is right, that you would like to go on to another level and give whatever talents you have to that. And we haven't had a lot of family court background judges. We've had general jurisdiction that did family court cases, but we haven't really had a lot of those run. In fact, one of the first ones was Judge Sanders, who came from family court in Baton Rouge and ended up on the Supreme Court. But Judge Downing called me and said that I'm not going to run. He had always promised me that if he didn't run, he would tell me, so that if I wanted,
he's true to his word. Huh?
He was. If I wanted to consider it, I would. So I had like overnight to decide if I was going to do this. It was not on the horizon. I loved what I did. But you know, sometimes you have to take opportunities that are presented to you. And so I made that decision last July, I think it was, and I qualified. And thankfully for me and my family and my supporters, after a lot of hard work, we were successful.
Well, and as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the first female judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeal from East Baton Rouge Parish.
From East Baton Rouge Parish.
And there's what, three?
There's 3 women now, right. I joined 2 others. One came from what we call the Florida parishes, and the other one came from the river parishes down the river.
And that's Judge Whipple and McClendon?
Judge McClendon.
Fantastic. Give the folks a big picture of kind of how our system works, because we have the local governments would be like East Baton Rouge Parish, Metro Council and the mayor. You got the state government with Governor Jindal and the legislature, and you hear about that stuff. And then you got the federal government with President Obama and Congress and all that. But the government is also broken up on, really, frankly, all those levels into 3 branches. Explain to the folks.
And you know, the 3rd branch that we haven't mentioned yet is the judiciary, and it's supposed to be an independent branch to be able to follow the Constitution and protect people's rights. So our court system is part of the state judiciary, and the Court of Appeal that sits in East Baton Rouge Parish is called the First Circuit. We have 5 circuits in the state of Louisiana, and our circuit is over 16 parishes.
Huge territory.
It's a huge territory, and we have judges elected, throughout the 16 parish area.
And you also have the most populated district.
And we have the highest caseload, and a lot of that has to do with Katrina. A lot of people came here and increased our numbers, but it also has to do with us being the base of state government, so a lot of cases originate here.
And that also results, I presume, because of criminal side of litigation, they're going to sue the Attorney General, Buddy Caldwell, and so it falls into the 19th JDC and then
their
to First
cases
Circuit.
Come to us, right.
Explain to the folks what it was like to run for the First Circuit. What do you have to do?
Well, you just have to ask every person you can make some kind of contact with if they would consider voting for you after you tell them a little bit about yourself. Now with East Baton Rouge Parish, it wasn't the whole parish, but it was 230,000 voters. And we found this out sometime in July, I can't remember the day of qualifying, and the election was October the 2nd, I believe, last year. So it was a compressed period of time, and it's a combination of as much personal contact as you can do, but also media and through organizations, and I was everywhere, anywhere I could be. This time, different. I had a web page that followed what I was doing, and I was shocked at the
I saw you had a Twitter too.
I did, I had Twitter, and I was shocked at the people that follow you and decide that they want to ask you questions or support you because of that. So I called in every friend, every family member I could, and we did a huge sign campaign. We were the underdog as far as money is concerned, but one good thing about family court is how many people you touch.
And I think I read 30,000 proceedings. You handled 30,000 proceedings at family court.
You have to explain that so nobody thinks that you saw 30,000 people
right.
going through a divorce. But in family court, there's so many different proceedings in each case that's how many I heard.
But you deal with a lot of folks.
Right.
And the bottom line is, and not all states are like this, we elect our judges.
Absolutely.
And you and I were talking before the show. I think it's a great thing because it provides accountability for the judiciary. We elect the executive, the governor, the mayor, the president, Congress folks.
I think you tend to like what system you come from. Next year, this year I'm the president-elect of the American Judges Association, and so in October of next year I'll be sworn in as president. So I have relationships in working with judges from all over the country, and some of them are appointed. They all think that's the greatest way to do it, and we're elected and we think that. But what I do like about elected judges is, we have a big parish here. By the fact that you run, you go to parts of the parish that if you were just appointed and you had an office in a downtown high-rise building, you might not even know where Pride is or
right.
Cheneyville, or places in South Baton Rouge. And by running, you get to know people and understand what they are talking about, or where places are, or what the issues are in your community.
Now the terms of the appellate court judges is 10 years. That's a long time. So it's kind of I guess the reason it's so long is it's removing the folks from having to run often, say like a congressman who runs every 2 years. You guys get to settle in and not worry about kind of the political aspect of it and focus on applying the law.
Well, once we become elected, we can't really be involved in politics. So I think that's one of the reasons for that. But I think it's also that we're put in a position sometimes of making decisions that are not popular with what the public perceives that they want or like at the time, and they forget that we have to follow the law. Now, if they want to go and have the law changed through their representatives or their legislators or their congressmen, they can do that, but we don't do that.
Right.
And so I think it insulates people, our judges, from having to respond to those hot button issues. Sometimes you can just apply the law. And of course, I'm just in the middle. I mean, if we make a mistake, you still can go to the Supreme Court and you've got somebody else to look at, at your case. So it's a check and balance thing to where people get justice and get treated right. And if they don't think they got it on the trial court level, then they've got the opportunity to appeal to us, and then we look at the whole case and decide whether we think it was a correct ruling or not.
And we talked about the different branches of government. You got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. The legislative branch is the one that writes the laws, right, and they're supposed to be connected to the folks. The executive branch, mayor, president, governor, is supposed to be implementing the laws. And the judiciary's job is what you were saying, is to interpret the laws based on the facts that come to the judges.
Absolutely.
And that's why you have the system set up the way you have. Let's talk about the First Circuit Court of Appeal, because you were on the front lines and now you're at the appellate level. What is the big differences that you're seeing right now?
Well, the big difference for where I came from is that I really miss litigants and lawyers, because almost everything we do is about grading papers, because it's on paper. We do have oral arguments where the lawyers can come in, but the clients don't normally come, and they're arguing whether a judge made a mistake legally or...
All right, well, let's continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines and Judge Toni Higginbotham. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, we're very pleased to have on the show today Judge Toni Higginbotham. She is a judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge, we were talking about basically what you did at the trial level and why the government's set up the way it is, and particularly why the judiciary is set up the way it is. Explain to the folks, as you started to, the difference between the trial level and the appellate level.
Well, the trial level, which is where I served before, is where everybody comes, whether they're representing themselves or with lawyers, and present their evidence. And the judge receives that evidence according to the rules of evidence and makes a decision, hopefully applying the law, after all of that evidence is presented. So it's long, arduous days on the bench to hear all of this and to come to a decision. My new position on the Court of Appeal, we are actually being asked to look over something that a trial judge has already decided. So we are presented a written record, sometimes audio too, but basically a written record. And we have to go through the whole record without people talking to us and without seeing people firsthand and without being able to assess credibility. And we're having to make a decision whether or not this case should be upheld as the judge ruled or if it should be overturned. So there is a lack of litigants there and there are a lack of lawyers. It's a lot of reading.
Some people say that's great.
Well, I like all my litigants and my lawyers. I might be different, but you know, I miss that part of it, but I also relish the fact that I'm getting to see so many different issues and make decisions that I think really affect people's lives.
It's interesting because, you know, I've heard the statistic bounced around that 10% of communication is the words actually spoken, and 90% is all the nonverbal stuff. And, you know, at the trial level, you get to see all that.
Absolutely.
At the appellate level, you see that black and white word, and that's it.
I miss that.
That's the reason, is it not, for the great deference that the appellate courts give to the trial judge?
Yes, I mean, under our law scheme, we have to give great deference because they are there. They're looking at these people. They can see their body English. They can put all the different witnesses together, their stories, and see how they jive. And we can't see that. So our law is very strict in that there should be manifest error. We don't decide if, you know, I might have made a different decision on that case. That's not the standard. And it's, you know, you have to keep telling yourself that, okay, I'm looking at this, but I have to give great deference to what the trial court judge decided. And
again, just so the folks understand, at the appellate court, nobody's coming up there testifying again, nobody's taking and giving photographs or any of that stuff that might come in via the record.
We have the record, but we don't have witnesses that we see testifying.
And the manifest error is basically saying we recognize as a judicial system that the trial court was there to recognize that stuff. And our review is going to be limited to, uniquely for Louisiana appellate courts, both law. Did the judge apply the law properly to the facts?
And facts.
Explain to the folks why we have review at the appellate level of both law and facts.
Well, I think it's because we're not a common law state and we have written laws, and so therefore errors can be made on that as well as just the way the judge handles something or whatever. So we want to see if there were mistakes on both of those things.
And the beauty is, though, that you're not messing with either unless it's way more than 51%. You're not coming in and saying, I believe them instead of them, because you weren't there and you recognize the judge was, and that's just the bottom line.
Absolutely.
Explain to the folks how the appellate court works. It has panels of judges that are put together, and explain to the process of how the judges deal with it.
The First Circuit has 12 judges, and we are assigned to a panel of 3 judges for a year at a time. And
so you got 4 panels then?
We have 4 panels. And so when somebody goes to the clerk of court and files a suit, it is allocated to a judge and to a panel first, and then ultimately to a judge to be primary on it. Randomly. We have no idea what cases we're going to get or anything like that. The only
so there's no preferential treatment or bias, no control over.
I don't get to choose the ones I like or anything like that.
And in fact, you've talked about prior to our show that you have to recuse yourselves. Everybody does.
I
Explain.
have standard recusals in the First Circuit because I have 3 children that are lawyers and a husband that's a lawyer.
So if they're involved, you're out.
I don't do that case at all. And then the other thing with me that's a big deal is that I was on the family bench so long, and family cases keep coming back, that I don't make a decision on any case that I've ever done anything on. So they know that immediately when they come in to the clerk of court, and they try to catch all those, and I don't get those cases. But it's a random allotment, and we're given the cases, and then we have a cycle where we do all the research. you know, try to read all the evidence, read the transcripts, and then if they request it, they can have oral argument before us. And then the 3 judges decide how they're going to rule on this case.
And it's not a majority decision rules, is it, at the panel level?
Well, initially it's not really